And we are back. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Into the Void podcast, the show with the title that has three meanings: where we are screaming, our relevancy in the cultural conversation, and our ranking in the iTunes rankings there, or our trajectory in the iTunes ranking, as it will. It has been a while since I've done that, and clearly I'm a little rusty on that, but I'm already starting the day off real mad. And I'm going to get to it real quick. So, luckily, before too long, I was supposed to bring the show back a little bit. Luckily, though, only this time it was only 2.5 month hiatus, and not like in the realm of years or 1 year this time. So, we are making progress pretty soon. I think at this point now, we are now entering the death of the old podcast and the beginning of the new, if you will. The reason for that is, I went back to Oregon for a bit to do a little bit of stuff for school and had to figure all that kind of stuff out. And then I went, now I'm back in California, and while that was all happening, I was trying to get the podcast started and keep it going. I was only expecting to take a couple weeks off, but it ended up being more like a couple months because there was a lot of stuff going on. Still kind of on the tail end of all the chaos and the strife. But now it's starting to wind down where I'm able to get back into the swing of things again. And while I was trying to record a new episode, actually, my computer crashed. So that made me real happy. Hasn't done that since I've ever had it for almost 10 years, and it decided to do that then. So I had to get my computer fixed and everything, and get everything set up, and try to get that all fixed again. And luckily, there was certain important things that I was able to keep safe because I had on my Google Drive anyways. But so I had to restart and have a fresh new computer, basically, in terms of the operating system and all that, because it crashed on me right when I was about to start recording new episodes again. So that threw me off, and amongst other things, it just pushed it back a little more. But luckily, I take this serious enough where I'm going to restart it anyways, and I'm trying to keep getting more and more consistent as time goes on. Especially in terms of trying to keep it going and keep it somewhat, I guess, relevant, but give me something to do while I go to school or whatever. That's also the new thing. I had quit my job, and I'm back in school now. And we'll get more to that later, because this is actually what this intro, I'm recording an intro because I'm going into detail about my college experience, and I think college experience for everyone else. But first, I'm going to do a quick few plugs. Into the Voidcast at gmail.com, Into the Voidcast at Facebook, Into the Voidcast on Twitter, Into the Voidcast on Instagram. And now, for you Android listeners, even though you probably don't exist because you weren't able to really listen much anyways. But Into the Void podcast now is on YouTube. I'm still in the process of trying to get it available elsewhere. That's maybe a little easier than YouTube, but it seems like YouTube's a pretty good place to go with things. So that is a new announcement. That's also sort of what I was working on in the meantime while I was on hiatus from recording. I left the link to the YouTube page on the Instagram page because right now it is really hard to find because I cannot make a custom URL anymore. So basically the URL is basically the code for the website because that's pretty much how long and complicated it is. Might as well just be the code for the actual page. So I pasted that on there, and it's very important that you subscribe on the YouTube channel because once I hit 100 subscribers on it, I can actually change the URL to probably Into the Voidcast if no one takes it. But I would like to be able to change it to something more easy to find, easy to access for everyone. It makes everything easier for everyone else. That's the only thing. Rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. It's very important that that happens. It helps everybody in the process, listener and creator such as myself alike. I think I mentioned everything that there is to be plugged on there in terms of the podcast. I'm also going to talk to you about six-pack skateboards now. So buy your t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, boards, koozies, anything that has to do with six-pack skateboards. Buy it from them. Buy from local skate shops. It's actually very important that you buy locally and not support the Walmart of skateboarders such as Zoomies and whatnot, because those local guys are what creates the scenes and allows the skateboarding lifestyle to be as fun as it is, and why everyone wants to be a part of it. Yeah, so go to Six Pack Skateboards on Instagram and Facebook. And follow Rocco the beer can on all his adventures in the skateboarding world. So, like I said, usually I do this podcast like a live radio show. I record it live. I do everything live. I don't edit. I just play the theme music and then go from there. I'm used to that a little bit more in terms of working in certain aspects of radio. I treat it basically more like an internet radio show that's distributed like a podcast. So this one was a little different because I recorded everything and then kind of ended up having it all be in post-production. But if you remember correctly, about a year ago, during one of the other little limp-wristed attempts to revive the show, I started talking about my college experience, because I do think it's an important story to tell, not just for me, but for all the students in the world, because it's something that everyone goes through every single day in terms of dealing with college and being a student, going to college, and the financial suicide that it really is. Interestingly enough, as I recorded this intro, I just got off the phone with the business affairs office at Oregon State, because I've yet to get my financial aid refund, even though the term for summer term has started, and I still need to buy books. And it was my big complaint about LBCC, but apparently OSU wanted to jump on that train too. So I called them, and they were like, "Oh, well, yeah, I don't know why it didn't work, why the automated system didn't work. You were flagged to have it go through, blah, 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 and yet it didn't." So they're like, "Oh, well, we'll push you up on the little thingy on the computer since it didn't happen automatically. So just, I guess, wait till Monday at the latest to tell us anything." Meanwhile, I literally have $3 in quarters to my name. Not a joke, actually. I really wish it was. Although the fact that it's not a joke might make it actually funnier for some people. Anyhow, I do think it's very important. I don't want it to come off as just a whiny and complainy fest. I try my best to enlighten people on the fact that it is the world's college, I should say, is the world's most successful and prolific pyramid scheme on planet Earth. Frankly, at this point, I almost don't even know. I don't even know if I want to tell my kids to go to college, because at this point you have, first of all, everyone's in college now, which really greatly. I'll get that. I'll get into that actually during the course of these podcasts. So, for those of you who really don't care, don't turn off the podcast. Just stay with me on this marathon. It's a marathon. It ain't a sprint. It'll be a little bit of a trip, and hopefully somewhat interestingly enough to where you actually want to follow along and engage in it. After this is done, I've noticed that on the old podcasts that I did, I actually talked about it and whined about it a little more than I had thought. So I kind of talked about it ad nauseum. But I think it was because back then I was also around people that were kind of maybe not deep in it in the sense of having the same exact experience, but they were close enough as students to see and feel the ripple effects of certain experiences. So I think this will be the last of it. I'm hoping that after this series of podcasts, you won't have to be under the weight of me talking and complaining about how much college sucks after this. I can't promise anything, but I certainly won't talk about it ad nauseum as I did before. But anyways, so back to college being a pyramid scheme. Basically, you have the President of the United States, even as far back as I think Kennedy almost. Probably even farther back than that, though, telling everyone that they need to go to college and that a college degree, the most expensive piece of paper you will ever buy in your life, is worth it. It's a golden ticket to $1 million. Honestly, at this point, I've come to the conclusion that if you're not a lawyer, a doctor, or going into STEM, you probably shouldn't go to college. You don't need to. You just got to go into your industry and then pay your dues and then do the work from there, and then you will probably most likely find success more than going to college, telling an 18-year-old to spend about as much money as they would on a house in order to pay for the incredibly expensive school, not even a private school, mind you, but a state school, and go into mountains and mountains of debt and see really nothing for it other than a piece of paper and a really high-paying barista job. And a lifetime guarantee of junk mail for your troubles. But all that aside, I basically just wanted to really go in depth of the story where there were even probably times that I probably should have had a little bit more foresight or thought harder about it. In terms of certain strategy items, in terms of going to school. The problem was I was backed into a corner. I didn't have any, job prospects out of high school in terms of being even just getting like a retail job just to start because I'll explain in the podcast in general. But, the job market was hard at the time, and I didn't have any experience because I wasn't able to get a job while I was in high school. And, of course, you could say that, furthers the argument for college. But at the very least, in the time it would have taken me to eventually find a job or whatever, or the connection, I would still not be racking up serious amounts of debt. So I would just go from $0 to dollars instead of negative hundreds and thousands of dollars, or not even hundreds of thousands, but thousands of dollars into maybe breaking even when I'm about 84 and a half years old. So that's the kind of thing that maybe could have maybe worked out greater in my benefit. I don't know. I'm not against educating yourself, obviously. I think there's a smarter way to do it, and right now it's not a smart way to do it because it's a pyramid scheme. It's not actually trying to really teach you anything other than indoctrinate a certain agenda for people. I think there are obviously good teachers out there and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's all bad. I think that the bad, especially the economics of it, far outweigh the benefits at this point, where people aren't so much investing in college as much anymore. It very much plays like a pyramid scheme, especially when family, politicians, teachers, everyone are saying you should go. So at this point, though, it's so far into the pyramid that it'll probably just be a self-sustaining machine for a long time. I'm not trying to take down colleges. Colleges do serve some sort of purpose. I think, though, we are in the time period where its purpose is being greatly overshadowed and pushed to the back burner, which is sad. because you actually have people that enjoy college. They enjoy learning. They enjoy the school atmosphere. And now everyone has ruined it for them, basically. Um, but yeah, so I basically just wanted to tell this story of frustration and hair pulling and um, wall punching. Just kidding. Um, a lot of people may not know this about me, but I'm not mega emotional like that. It makes me want to in my brain, though. It does give me an aneurysm sometimes. And how I walked out of an aneurysm alive, I still don't know, but that's what happens. I think also one of the biggest things is that what I mean by I was backed into a corner with no other alternative was I never really wanted to go to college necessarily. I just wanted to get a jump start on my career because the career type that I want to go into is very much just being in it, paying your dues, putting in your time, getting the on-the-job training experience, and just putting in, it's hard to get your foot in the door, but at least in my career industry, just getting your foot in the door isn't made easier by a college degree. Not always. But in order to pay your dues, you just got to be in it. And that's what I really wanted to do more than anything. Because I knew that maybe when I really just thought college might put off, anything that would keep me stuck or whatever for the meantime until I can get everything organized to actually get started on my career. Maybe made me a little myopic in terms of being so tunnel visioned about my career and what I wanted to do with my life that it obviously things like school and putting all my focus in it, not in terms of getting bad grades or doing a bad job or whatever, but so focused that I didn't really take the time and effort to maybe stand up for myself to the bureaucracy of college or advocate for myself. I didn't care to fight that battle because I knew I needed my energy to fight battles elsewhere. And my desire to finish school so quickly maybe caused it to last longer. I guess that's up for you to decide for this story. And the reason why I think I am somewhat justified in saying it's a pyramid scheme is because I've talked to other students, a small number, a sample size, if you will, of other students that have had similar, identical, different but difficult, but similar in difficulty type of stories, or that they told me, or just I noticed a pattern that was happening. And the pattern seems to be continuing as of today. Luckily, I am gritting my teeth and hanging on by a thread and finishing. At this point, I don't remember if I went too deep in it, but basically, I think I did. But essentially, I'm just trying to finish that bachelor's degree because there are maybe some chances, and I'm probably not going to take them or whatever, but there were some chances to further my schooling career down in California if I finish my bachelor's at Oregon State. And so in order to maybe think about that, I decided probably just in terms to go back to Oregon State and try to finish it, but not without my qualms and bones to pick with the people in order to make it known how I really feel and think, and or at least what my plan will be now looking forward after looking back about it, and maybe showing people and that work for certain universities or whatever that I think it's time to shape up, and I'll shape up if you do, kind of thing. And I don't know, but without further ado, it's good to be back. There's some new things that came for the show. There are new things that are coming, and try to enjoy the show. I actually had a pretty decent time doing it, and it was something different because this is all post-production, but instead of kind of live radio style, so the time some of the timing of the episodes might seem a little off. That's why. And then we'll get back to business as usual after the series is over. So without further ado, let's get to it with Into the Void.
I'm a jerk.
No argument here.
Robert, that's sweet of you to say, but it's true. We did some further research. There's no way the baby could be mine.
Our original understanding of sperm was erroneous.
All that aside, Chrissy, I'm sorry I said you'd be a bad mother. It's not true. And I would like to try to make it up to you by offering to pay for the baby's college education. The whole thing. PhD, grad school, wherever he wants to go. No way. How do people afford that? I'm rich, but I'm not crazy. How about a microwave? Luther, set him a microwave.
Into the void.
Ladies and gentlemen, children of all wages, it is now time for the main event. Most of the reason why I've been off the podcast for a while, I had to deal with some headaches, hassles, and horseshit to tell you the story of the old headaches, hassles, and horseshit. I would probably advise my mother to not listen because there might be some good old swear words because I'll probably get worked up and angry, and more angry than I already am, I guess. But without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to go through this like Conrad Thompson, something to wrestle with. Bruce Pritchard. Anyways, so when I was a young kid, I've always wanted to be a director. Of course, over the years, certain things change sometimes, and you get interested in certain things and find your interest elsewhere, and sometimes you don't always lock into what your actual future career you want and what it would be. Sometimes people change their minds over the course of the years, and that happened briefly or whatever for a time, but pretty much since I was pretty much since I ever first saw the original Star Wars trilogy, I was very into the idea of filmmaking and wanting to direct movies and or television, whichever I can find a good paying job doing in that industry. And it really was a lock for me pretty much when I hit 8th or 9th grade. And so that was what I was striving towards going through high school and trying to get into college, and then moving on from there in order to pursue my career. So luckily, unlike a lot of people my age, it's nothing. I'm not saying I'm special or anything at all that way, but I was just lucky to have a goal that I was pursuing, and goal-oriented person, and trying to achieve something that I had already planned to achieve. And it's no knock, obviously, against people who were my age at the time and in high school not knowing, because shoot, if I was unlucky enough, or if I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into what I wanted to do, I'd be in the same boat, just because, people that young just don't know what they want to do. And some people are even, my parents and grandparents' age, and they don't even know what they want to do. So it's not necessarily a bad thing or whatever, but I was lucky enough to have an idea of what I wanted to do with my life and how I wanted to live it. And, sometimes in life things get in your way of doing that. Sometimes it's lucky and you get right through, and maybe my luck changed after a while. But when in high school, over the course of high school, I was a little unlucky in terms of Oregon is not necessarily well known for their extreme amount of, or their wide variety of choices of film schools to go to. And I wanted to go to a film school because, number one, I never really grew up with a whole lot of money and access to certain resources like a decent camera or a computer program that can edit videos or Photoshop or anything like that necessarily. So despite my objections to my parents wanting me to go to college, I thought maybe it might be a good idea to go just to maybe to get access to those resources and equipment I've never had access to before, and therefore could practice on them and get good at them, and just heighten my chances of making it in an industry that's already really hard to get into anyways. So I thought it would be playing it smart a little bit that way. Another reason I sort of wanted to stay in Oregon was because my dad worked in the state of Oregon university system, which I will get to later as to why that would be a big deal. But first, I'm going to start, not necessarily my first year in college. I'm going to start back when I was a fresh-faced little baby boy. and towards the end of my senior year of high school, to basically just give you context as to how this story turned out and stuff. And I'm only telling the story because, number one, I think it's important in general to have known the plausible pitfalls of going to college, and I guess maybe not going to college, pitfalls and benefits of not going to college and such, along with benefits and pitfalls of going to college. Number two is mostly because I noticed a pattern that it wasn't just me that had to deal with all this stuff. And the reason how I noticed that pattern was basically, unfortunately, despite my ability to not be incredibly verbose, which you as the podcast listener of my podcast knows, I'm not very good at talking. But somehow I managed to talk to other students that were in my same situation, and it seems to be an actual decent trend and a match that seemed to happen in particular with people in my major. Now, obviously, there still have been plenty perfectly successful students in that major and all that kind of stuff. Ryan, my long-lost co-host, being one of them, he had a little bit of a hiccup in terms of transferring or whatever, but he still managed to make up some time for it. Not nearly, didn't take nearly as long as it's been took for me. But there are also other students that I've met that have had the same problems and same hurdles to jump over. So I think the importance comes from the fact that I learned that I wasn't just a student that fell by the wayside. There's actually a lot of students that fell through the cracks and fell by the wayside, and I'd like to know why. And I started this story last year when I tried to revive the podcast again, or not tried, but did revive the podcast again. I started on it. I didn't go really too deep in it again because I was in the fetal position in a closet to make sure I get decent audio, and it was really hard to go through the whole story, even starting it and go in any sort of depth or context or even telling the story well, because I didn't have the ability to comfortably sit and talk about it, and felt rushed. So I thought I started over again and kind of put an end to the chapter in hopes that it can put an end to many things that I and other people are involved in as well. So yeah, without further ado, I'll start with senior year of high school. Towards the end. Also, this was towards the tail end of the economic recession, so it wasn't necessarily guaranteed that I would have a decent job that could help pay for my life, especially if I was maybe going to try to somehow live independently and move on from there and create a life of my own. So that was another reason why school became somewhat alluring, in the sense that I can go to school, work my way towards a degree, and as I look for work, basically. And I'd actually, at least be doing something to enrich my life while I go to work, or while I try to find work and find good work, and then finally make my way to, unfortunately, have to go to Los Angeles, which I'm hoping will change soon, but is now still the mecca of the entertainment industry. Los Angeles is a fine city. Unfortunately, being the type of person I am, I could probably only live there for a limited amount of time. I'm more of a small town guy than I am a big city guy. I can function in the big cities, okay, but it's just a little overwhelming sometimes to always constantly be surrounded by people and things, especially when you want to do things somewhat in peace and quiet, much like this podcast. And so, yeah, I think I tailed off pretty big there. But that was kind of my idea, was that basically I'd get into LA, get established, make a good living, cash my chips, and get out. And maybe not completely out, but at least out enough to where if I'm not working on any certain projects, I can live somewhere else and then come in whenever I had a project. If I got to the point where I can pick and choose projects. The idea for me was become a director. It always has been. I'm not a great performer. I wish I was better. I really do. I just never developed the performance slash verbal skills and abilities to pass as a performer. But I was always good at telling a story, writing, understanding stories, and creating. And I have a pretty analytical and conceptual mind where I can develop creations. So knowing that, I said, well, it looks like my forte would then be directing, where you dip in a little bit into the business world in terms of budgets and all that stuff, but you're still mostly a part of the creative process, and using those business analytical skills in a different way to create certain art, I guess. I sometimes hate that word, and creative and all that kind of stuff. It just sounds so pretentious, but what else do you call it? That's the word in our language that signifies it. But without further ado, yes. So I basically I was looking for a film school, a school that actually somewhat caters to filmmakers, visual artists, people that would likely have equipment and the things that I would need to do that. And generally, obviously, if they offer those majors, then they have that equipment there, or things that would foster the environment for it. So the only ones I really found in Oregon were Portland State. I looked it up. They said they had a film school. I applied to Oregon State because that was obviously nearby, and they had something like a film school-ish there. And then U of O because they had cinema studies there. But I could not. I had the application for U of O filled out, but I didn't have the money to pay the fee, because the fee is just about as much as tuition just to fill out a damn piece of paper to get into school. So I never actually fully applied to U of O to where I would get acceptance or rejection. The only ones I could afford were Portland State and Oregon State. I heard within about a month from Portland State that I got accepted. I didn't hear anything from OSU until further notice at this time. This was about winter/spring of my senior year of high school, which was 2010. Looks like I wrote down April 2010. So I got accepted to Portland State at April 2010. And so at that point, I was like, well, at least I'm going somewhere. That one likely had the better film school, because Portland is obviously a town that's a little more artsy and bigger. So at that point, I didn't even hear from Oregon State until September 2010. Which at that point was pretty inconsequential in terms of acceptance or rejection from them. I already obviously decided to go to Portland State because obviously April is still pretty late to hear, but I'd applied there late. So I still heard pretty promptly from them, and Obviously, when April's coming around and you're senior year of high school, you're kind of headed straight towards the tunnel that is graduation. So you kind of have to make a choice quick, and obviously that's what I did. Um, yeah, so the reason I stayed basically within the realm of Oregon state schools in particular was because my dad worked at Oregon State, and he got well, hi everybody, there's Lemmy. Hey, be quiet. So my dad worked at Oregon State, and you, as an employee of a state school, you get a tuition discount, up to 70% on your tuition, and that is obviously, as a lot of students know, is huge. The only pitfall is that your financial aid gets scaled down to match your cost needs. So your tuition gets scaled down, 30%. So you're paying 30% of what normally people have to pay, but you're also receiving 30% of what people pay. So you still have the same percentage of money left over if you have any refund as you would if you paid more anyways. So it all kind of cancels out in a way. The only thing is that maybe you don't have as high a debt. But for me, I was always trying to acquire as little debt as possible for school. Acquire a little debt as possible, which probably later bit me in the ass anyways. But I saw how people in my family older than me went to college and how much debt they racked up. I mean, luckily they've been able to pay it off because they got decent jobs from their degrees, but still, that's not always guaranteed, especially in the volatile industry I was going into. I wanted to make sure there were less problems to run into outside of the problems of being massively broke until you basically get a decent break in the industry. So on my plan for college, I wanted to get college done as soon as possible, along with not getting as much debt, because the longer you're in school, obviously the more debt you rack up, obviously. And so when I finished, technically I finished school or high school after the first semester of my senior year. At that point, I had all my credits required for the state to allow you to graduate high school, and even then, I only took one class in the first semester because you're only allowed 2 open periods at West Albany High School. They're like, you do have to be in school in some capacity. You can't just not be in school except for one day, or except for one class or whatever. So I had to take a bullshit class and plus the last class that I needed. So after the first semester, though, I talked to my counselor, and I wanted, starting the second semester, since I had all my credits ready, I will still be able to take classes at Lynn Benton. There's Lynn Benton Community College. There's been plenty of high school kids that go there. A lot of times it's to get their GED or whatever, but a lot of times too is because they want to get started on their general education classes. So they can kind of get a head start in college, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. If I can get those general education backcore bullshit classes out of the way, or just getting college credits before I even graduated high school or whatever, or before I was supposed to graduate high school, then that would be a huge head start. And we'll get to backcore later for sure. Anyways, so I talked to my counselor at my high school, and he informed me that if I take basically if I leave now, if I leave at the end of that first semester, or at this point, if I leave the school to go to LB, technically I'm no longer a student enrolled, and basically they would just print out my diploma there and send me on my way. And I couldn't walk in June. I couldn't walk for the graduation ceremony because technically I'm not a student anymore. Well, as much as you instinctually don't care what your family or whatever may think, you still have to oblige them sometimes. And basically, before I even finish the sentence of, "Hey mom, so I did this, and I can graduate now, but I can't walk." By the time I basically ended that sentence, she was like, "Oh, you're walking. There's no question." So unfortunately, I basically just had to take some more bullshit classes just to stay in school there in order to walk in June. Yeah, there's no way I could get away with there's no way I can get out alive, I should say, not walking at my high school graduation. That's sort of the unfortunate what is it? The unfortunate pitfall, I guess. I've been saying pitfall too much, but yeah, pretty much the unfortunate pitfall of being the youngest kid is, and when egos are involved especially, it's the unfortunate part about being the youngest kid, basically, is that for special occasions like that, you don't always have much choice. So I stayed, though, and just plan to go to college the next fall. The main reason why, as someone said before, the main reason why I was so intent on making my college experience as streamlined as possible, which is hilarious to think about now, because a lot of people around me I saw, especially in small town America, little do you know, there's a lot of partying going on, small town America. I never really partied too much, especially in high school. I was most of my days / weekends or whatever was mostly just skating as much as possible, and I mean that was pretty much it. Like there were times where me and my friends would be skating all night, all through the night, and so anything I did school-wise, whatever, was to open up time for skateboarding. So there wasn't a whole lot of drinking and drugs on my part, but there were a lot that I saw around me doing that. They were just screwing around and racking up college debt at the same time, and I didn't want to do that. Especially for the degrees that some of them were getting, we're at the lesbian basket weaving degree or whatever. It wasn't worth it. And, you could argue, my degree is kind of the same thing, and I will admit mine's kind of borderline in terms of its usefulness. The only reason why mine is getting any sort of more reasonable is because everybody now, even a damn realty office, wants some sort of media presence. So, it's pretty easy to, or it's much easier to find a job in that way while you try to, break into the entertainment industry. So that was basically my plan for college. Was I was trying to play it smart. Maybe I outsmarted myself, but who knows? So as the summer goes by, I still couldn't find any work. Again, the job talent pool was very deep right now because there were a lot of people. It was still on the tail end of the recession, where people were just looking for any job. So of course, some dumbass high schooling, horrible skateboarder with no job, official job experience, just because you mowed lawns for your neighbor or whatever and got paid for it, it doesn't really count. So they weren't going to take me anytime soon, unless I had some sort of mafioso connection or whatever. And that obviously just wasn't the case. So the summer was mostly just making skate videos or just skating all the damn time, which was plenty fun for me, and just waiting for college to start in September. And obviously, because at that point, it was my last real summer I could actually have before I had to grow up. Also, I didn't know you can go to school in the summer, and I still had all that I had all the other, paperwork bullshit to go through before I could get started in school. So obviously starting school in the summer would have been nice in hindsight, but back then I didn't know that you could do that. So basically I was waiting until September, and I think around August, no, I think it was actually the week before fall term started in September. So I think it was like the first or second week of September. This was also when I moved up to Portland, and I moved in with my extremely flexible and wonderful brother-in-law and sister. They didn't have to take me in, but they knew what I was trying to do with college in terms of not building up debt and having to get on school. Housing would definitely have been a horrible, horrible waste of money. So they said, pay what you can in terms of rent if you can at all, and that would be much appreciated. Otherwise, don't worry about it. You got a place to stay and study and all that good jazz. So it was also that week I was moving up there while we did the orientation, and I got to the orientation, and basically, orientation at college is basically the place where wide-eyed freshmen go to begin the process of taking whatever they had planned for their life and then just throwing it in the trash. Because basically you go there and you find out, okay, I have certain things that I want to do with my life. Here's what I plan to do. And then they go, yeah, no. See, this is a game here, and you have to play it our way. And basically, that's what the orientation is. It's just letting you know ahead of time, so when you step in class, you're not completely shocked. You're only a little bit shocked. So basically, they go through the whole spiel of the welcome to PSU, like PowerPoint presentation with the brochures and pictures of all the racial and cultural and pro-diversity pictures of all the students, and say this is a wonderful utopia and blah 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 blah. And then they say, okay, now you're gonna go to all your department heads. So whatever major you have, you're gonna go your department head. So there's like the engineering, so you go to see the engineering department head, etc. You get the idea. I trust you. Very, very smart Into the Void listeners, what I'm talking, or where I was going with that. So, as we walk over to, we're a rather small group for the film department, obviously. Even though they have the department there, it's still a very small group. So, we walk over to the film department building. It actually just is a big building that says film on it. Yeah, believe it or not. And it seemed like the right place. And it seemed like a legit place. And so we walked in the door. My family and then the other students and their families. And we were also greeted by the theater arts majors because like most theater arts majors in any college, they have really nowhere to go. So we walked in to the film major department building, and already by the description, and again, this is maybe a mistake on my part, but maybe I made the mistake of assuming what it really meant, but the description when I had originally applied the description of the film major, it literally just says film. And it was the description of the entire major was very lawyery and very vague. It was just like, we're going to study film and analyze film and know how to make film or whatever. It barely even said know how to make film, but in general, it was very, very vague and, of course, worded to tell you that it's a useful degree, even though it may or may not be. So I made the mistake of assuming that, okay, this is like a film production major, and obviously that's why I'd applied and wanted to go there in the first place. So, but before too long, basically the department head cleared it right up as we barely got our butts in the seats. He basically said that the film major is not production; it is a studies major. And I should have known this. I mean, basically he was just like, guys, you're in Portland. And in Portland, there's a bunch of hipsters here. And you guys know that hipsters don't actually do anything. All we do is talk about it. We sit on our trust funds and we talk about shit. We don't actually do shit, though. And so everyone's face just kind of dropped. And everyone was just like, wait, what? And he was just like, yeah, it's not production, it's a film studies. Other people seemed less stunned about it or annoyed about it. The only reason why I was so stubborn about this being a particular major was, like I said before, I wanted access to certain equipment and the ability to practice certain equipment and use those resources to actually, produce something. And, I can talk about movies all day. You don't really need a degree to be able to do that. If you have any sort of basic understanding of reading and a story and what a picture looks like, then you can probably properly analyze movies in however way you do it, because you don't need formal education to do that. But I was stubborn about it because I actually wanted to be able to know how to use a camera. I wanted to be able to know how to edit the footage that was on that camera I learned how to use, and make the picture and audio and video and everything as good and professional as it possibly can be. I'm really also very stubborn on movie aesthetics. I want all my stuff to look professional, because I see the stuff on the big screen, even though I sound like a hillbilly, they're on that old big screen, but I wanted to see my stuff be on the big screen and look like a legitimate movie you see every weekend when you go to a movie or watch it on television. I don't know how to necessarily explain it, but you can kind of see like a wall of separation. Like there's like you're immersed in the movie, but you know that it's like a well done movie, and that's all what I always wanted. I didn't want to talk about movies. I didn't want to write essays about movies. I didn't want to be a film critic, because there's plenty of those anyways, especially now with the advent of social media, where monkey people can immediately post their thoughts and ideas within a half a second of thinking them and broadcasting them to the entire world, no matter how stupid or irrational or illogic or just straight up untrue and inaccurate they may be. And so I was like, well, there's no money in that anymore. It's adding to the noise. A cacophony of stupidity is what I like to call it. is the internet, and it's hilarious that I'm talking about that here on the internet, but that's neither here nor there. How else do I rise above, I guess, or how any of us rise above? Gotta beat the system from within. Anyways, that's why I was pretty stubborn about it, because plus I always had a rule too. What my rule was, you can't be a film critic if you've never made a movie. The basic idea of that rule is okay in general. It might be a little dumb, but I think people would be less harsh on movies if they know what it took to actually make them. That's basically my point. But yeah, so I wanted access to stuff that I otherwise would never afford. And so I felt kind of backed into a corner a bit. Because I guess at that point I could have maybe just waited another term and then heard from the rest of the schools. Well, basically OSU, because I only applied to that one, but I thought at that point too I could also scrape up enough money to apply to U of O. But I basically, if this happened and if I found this out any earlier, I could have waited a little bit and then maybe gotten into the right school. But I had no choice. I had no fallback plan, which again could have been my fault, and I'll accept that as another trip up that I had. But anyways, I fell back into a corner, and I just thought, well, for now I'll just go. And basically, he was just like, he carpet bombed us with the whole, well, it's not a film production class, and it's just film studies, and so good luck in your future career and your future endeavors, in the terms of the term that WWE likes to use. And, well, anyways, have fun being broke the rest of your life, and see you on your way. Later, guys. And that was pretty much it. And, it was just like, okay, then. Not sure how to move on from here, but I guess since he sent us back to the administrating buildings, I guess it's time to register for class. And the classes. Oh boy, the classes. So, in high school, much of the reason why I was able to graduate so early was because of placement tests. I did well on the math placement tests, and I got into the math classes that were like a step ahead from general. So a lot of times, Algebra 2, I think, is the minimum math requirement to graduate high school. So you can't take anything under than Algebra 2. So you have to take at least Algebra 2 to be able to graduate high school. I was lucky enough to be good at math the one day that I needed to be and got placed in Algebra 2. Basically placed in geometry in my freshman year of high school, which then in turn made me able to take Algebra 2 my sophomore year. So I already finished that my sophomore year. I took AP Biology at West Albany my senior year, and Writing 121 level class my junior year, which are all, or not junior year, sophomore year I think as well, just in high school. But the advisor at the Portland State, really good at his job, knows what he's doing, says, well, since you took those in high school, technically that counts towards your gen ed in college, and those credits can be transferred or whatever, and says, so you don't need to sign up for those. So I was like, perfect. I mean, that saves a lot of time, a lot of unnecessary class time, studying those subjects yet again. And I was like, all right, cool, that works for me. Won't sign up for those classes. And I signed up for a bunch of classes that had a little more to do with Classes that were somewhat gen ed. I basically fulfilled the rest of my gen ed requirements, whichever one there are, because there's an infinite amount of backcore you have to do in Oregon university systems. Because why on earth would you want to do anything about your major instead of spend like 2 to 3 years worrying about your backcore? But that's neither here nor there. So I applied for those, and then also for classes that were more grounded in my actual major. So I went with it, obviously, because that sounded like good news. Possibly too good to be true now. When I look back on it, I think it's because the advisor, I think, had his head up his colon. I'm not sure. That could be it. And didn't quite maybe understand that concept. But I was also at a young, fresh baby face, 18 years old, very myopic, 18 years old. I went with it, and I was like, cool, I'll start on everything and get done. The one thing that Portland State likes to do to boost their retention rates is have inquiry classes, which basically falls in line with the backcore system. They have certain subjects that you take your freshman and sophomore year. So basically you're in that same class for almost 2 years, I think. For sure, though, may not be the same classes, but for sure they're inquiry classes. Basically giving the gender studies, the more popular degrees with the social justice warriors, some sort of feeling of being involved in the university system. And you have to take those or else you don't graduate. And I think it's a little bit to boost our retention rates because it's hard to live only so long with hipsters in that town who don't know what they're talking about. And so I had to sign up for that one, and that was usually kind of the bulk of the classes that I was taking because you have to be there during actual class time during the day, and then you also have to go, I think, for some sort of, I guess you call it lab. You're not really doing anything lab-like in there. You're basically just watching documentaries, which for some reason have become like an academic, like verifiable piece of researchable, peer-reviewed science. And then talk about it, I guess. And this is no knock on the teachers in that inquiry class. I actually really liked her and the other. There were two of them. Obviously, the graduate student that ran the lab and then the actual teacher. They were really nice. I liked them. I got along with them. But obviously, none of this was just my cup of tea. And, and by the way, the class that I took was race and social justice. So that was a bunch of fun. Real good time. Obviously, there are things that I did agree with in that class, and obviously things I didn't agree with. But it was more stuff that was kind of a joke than anything. But as a whatever white guy, my opinions don't matter really anymore. So I'm cool with that though, because it gives me a lot of free time. So when the school year started, though, obviously this was shortly after, a couple weeks after registration. School starts in September, and we get into October. It was towards the end of October. I don't know why. I remember what happened was I could not sleep at all. I was an insomniac. It was mostly because of the pain in my shoulder. I was sleeping in a comfortable bed, so it had nothing to do with the uncomfortableness of the bed. I literally could not lay down on my right side because it was just too painful. I couldn't pick anything up. I couldn't even lift my right arm above my shoulder level. It hurt way too much. I couldn't do anything. The only thing I could really do functionally was play Halo with my brother-in-law, which I think my Halo game actually suffered a little bit because of my shoulder injury. Just kidding. But yeah, it was way too much pain. And this was in about October. And I've been like that for a while. But I think there was something that really, really happened that really took over. Because the pain was manageable for me. I was still able to skate, obviously, even when I, fell on my ass or fell super hard or had to catch myself from falling or just doing a lot of certain movements while I skated. You still use a lot of your shoulders, your arms, like to keep your balance and stuff. It was fine, and if there was any pain, a lot of times it was very manageable. It would be gone by the end of the day. I could just shake it loose, but then around October, it did get to the point where I was losing a lot of functionality in general because the pain was too much. And I think I finally told my family and friends about it. And obviously they suggested I go see a doctor, which was a new concept to me because I don't see the doctor for many things. I usually just try to tough it out if I'm sick or injured. I'm usually just like, I think I'm a lot like the dad from My Big Fat Greek Wedding where he's like, just put Windex on it. Like, I just am like, yeah, I'll just, drink muscle milk or something and I'll be fine. No need to worry. But finally it got to the point where I was like, all right, I'll go see a doctor. And after that first appointment, they're like, yeah, I think you got some issues here. So, I mean, obviously, but this time it was physical issues. Great dad joke. So he schedules an MRI. Obviously, I have to do it in the middle of the week. So, and I have to go to Corvallis to do it because that's just the main doctor and the doctor I know that will be covered with insurance or covered by insurance. So I go ahead and I talk to the doctor. He says let's schedule an MRI. So I missed a week of class. And I say a week because a lot of my classes were within like 2 or 3 days. But the travel from Corvallis to Portland with no car ate up a lot of time. So I had to miss a good chunk of classes, especially my psychology class that I had in during the mornings. I think Monday, Wednesday mornings. Luckily, the professor of that class at the end of fall term, after I told him everything that was going on, he gave, because again, I think it was after the withdrawal date, because I tried to tough it out. Maybe my stubbornness is coming back to bite me in the ass. Who knows? Probably. But I was stubborn enough. I was trying to finish out the class, but it was really hard to type. It actually was, like, for my shoulder, and it was hurting. And obviously, the last project was a long ass essay, like most psychologists like, and it caused me too much pain. Where I told him, I was like, "All right, that's it. Like, I can't do this. This is really hard, and I'm missing class because I have a bunch of doctor's appointments in a town 100 miles away." And luckily, after I told the professor this, he was nice enough to just give me an incomplete on the class because it was after the withdrawal date, the date of withdrawal, and otherwise I would have failed the class. So luckily, he gave me an incomplete on that one. After that risk of failing. And of course, the inquiry class I passed, not really that hard to do, did that. Sorry for that horrible edit point. I had to pee really bad. TMI, I know, but I had to. Anyways, so I passed that inquiry class and moving on. So there was a class that I had signed up for during registration. It was a 300 level class, which of course was like blasphemy in as a freshman to people. But I thought I could take it. It was a film and politics class. I was like, all right, cool. I'm good at film. I'm pretty decent at politics. I'm not a master of either, I guess, but I can hold my own and take that class. Maybe I was a cocky little shit back then. I probably am still now, but I accept it. Anyways, though, this class I did fail. I actually got an F on it. I know. But the reason why is much more interesting than the result. So this class was quintessential Portland hipsterism. Basically, it was talking about movies, of course, and analyzing, the political meanings behind it. So, of course, one of the movies we watched is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Good movie. Great example of movies and politics. That was fine by me. Next one was a documentary, I think, about Cory Booker, which was a wonderful visual puff piece for the politician. He's not that bad of a guy. He seems like he tries really hard. You can call him Try Hard for short. And he seems like a good guy. But, I mean, I don't necessarily completely agree with him on everything. There's a lot I do agree with him on. Lately, it seems like in the news, he's a little bit too much of a bitch boy for the Democratic Party. He didn't seem like that way in the documentary. I just didn't enjoy that it was kind of a puff piece, and it seemed like there was an agenda being pushed by the teacher, and turns out there was. There was another documentary that's very interesting about, I think, Barry Atwater and how he became the campaign guy for Ronald Reagan. Barry Atwater basically is Steve Bannon's wet dream. I'm sure he very much enjoyed him. But again, that one was kind of a hit piece against Reagan in particular. I'm not like a Reagan fanboy or anything, but my only issue with that kind of stuff is it's dishonest intellectually and I won't even say factually. It's just intellectually dishonest because for people you like, you're eliminating all the bad things. For people you don't like, you're eliminating any good thing that they do. I think obviously the best portrayal of anybody, especially in a documentary, considering that documentaries now have some sort of high esteem pointed towards them, is accuracy. I know sometimes that documentaries will be boring and less compelling if they're inaccurate, or any movie whatsoever, actually, anything. But with those things, you have to be accurate and intellectually honest. If you have a guy that you like that screws up, he screws up. And if he doesn't, great. But you got to acknowledge the screw-ups for the non-screw-ups. I mean, that's why essentially Donald Trump is untouchable, because he's like, yeah, I fucked up, but who cares? And you can't do anything about that, as much as it infuriates all of us. It's like, can't we get him on anything and not like get him as in like, impeach him or whatever? I mean, some people do, but it's just like, can't we just be like, come on, like anything where he'll be like, yeah, probably not a good idea, or like tries to avoid the topic or whatever, anything that will just be like, we need someone better. But unfortunately, you can't shame the shameless. So that was my only issue with it. But then the real big issue was not that I failed for lack of intellect, I guess, or talent in a film and politics class. Again, I'm probably just proving what a cocky asshole I am right now, and especially how I felt like I was back then when I was 18 years old. Could you imagine the amount of smugness that came out of me? It was more how I utilized, I guess, my intellect and talent. And back then, I was very much into politics. I read every political book in the game. I guess, which is why for most people it seems weird that I'm like kind of done talking about it in general, I should say, because I sort of just talked about it now, but it was more just an example to prove the point. but I think that's why I got so burnt out on it so fast, because I became obsessed with it for a while, and it's so far, the days that you don't want to be involved in it, people still try to involve you in it, and it's tiring. And so I'm a weary old man in the political world right now. But it doesn't mean I'm sticking my head in the sand and not keeping up on the times, I guess, or anything. I try to just keep up on like the weather forecast. That's about as much time I need to keep up on. But back then, though, this was definitely a thing that I was willing to fight on. And the last movie we saw, which was also supposed to be our final project, was Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. I was like, okay, I mean, maybe this is just a fun movie we can watch, and then maybe do like a criticism or analysis of how good of a movie it was or whatever. Because we were supposed to do like an essay after we watched the movie, and whatnot. But after we watched the movie, basically, again, I'm sure she's a nice lady, but the teacher in this class started going off about how this movie was some sort of Lord of the Rings-esque allegorical metaphor, whatever word you can do to say that it means another thing. The story means another thing than what you see on paper or whatever. About how this is a story about how minorities, specifically Asians and Indians or whatever, Indians from India, have a harder time reaching the American dream, which is White Castle, because of the white man, basically, essentially, because Neil Patrick Harris or whatever was able to get there super quick or whatever, and how the American dream is more of a pipe dream for everyone, even white people, but everyone, especially minorities, because they're always sidetracked by people who are already there or whatever. And I was just like, what? Like, I don't think that's it at all in any way, shape, or form. Like, this is such a logical stretch. Like, it's starting to burst apart at the seams. The thread is starting to go bing, 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 like in those movies, you know, when they're holding on by a thread off a cliff or whatever, and you see it like one by one, you know, break off. I was like, in what way whatsoever do you honestly think that the intent of the director was for a movie about two guys who got so high they couldn't just drive straight to a restaurant that serves really small, really mostly bun with a little bit of meat attached to it, burgers? I was like, no way. No way that was the intent. The intent was to tell a funny story about two guys who got so high they couldn't simply just go to a fast food restaurant and get a couple sliders. So I wrote my essay. I basically my essay was, I don't have any further analysis of this movie. I have really not much to say other than referencing Freud saying a cigar is just a cigar. So obviously I failed that essay and in turn failed the class. And do I maybe blame her? No, because I was probably being a cocky little shit. But there was no way I could get the message across that she was grasping at straws about that movie, other than maybe just she ran out of movies and maybe documentaries about certain politicians she wanted to prop up. So yeah, I admit that I was a bit cocky there, and maybe that I deserve that grade. And I'm okay taking that grade, though, because did you really want me to sit there and make a fluffy, bullshitted essay about something that's not even true about, like, a piece of entertainment? No, but later on I learned that's exactly what college is. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't looked up deep analysis of Harold and Kumar for almost 10 years now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is an interview out there where the director says that and she was just trying to direct us to say that or to start thinking that way. I don't know. Bottom line is, though, I had to share my view on it. And unfortunately, the grading of teachers in college is extremely subjective, even on relatively objective things. Anyways, in the meantime, though, my MRI had said that I had in fact torn my labrum in my shoulder, and that I would need surgery on it. But first, they wanted to start me out on physical therapy to see if that would help. My doctor loves prescribing physical therapy. He's a family friend. He's a great guy. But at this time, the physical therapy didn't really work. So that's another reason why I was going to and from Portland, Corvallis quite often, because my physical therapy appointments were also in Corvallis. And so I went there for I think it was 2 or 3 months, because about this time, it was about December, January, where they did another MRI, and because the physical therapy, even the physical therapist said it's just not working right now. He's not getting any strength in his shoulder again. He's not getting any flexibility in his shoulder again. Nothing seems to be necessarily being repaired or helped at all. And so they did another MRI, and they said, yeah, it's still pretty bad. And are like, okay, we need you to do surgery on the shoulder. And they scheduled my surgery on in April of 2011. And in the meantime, I was still going to school winter term. Especially after finishing up fall term, I was still going to school and then going to class in the meantime. Luckily, in order to help me succeed in both ways in terms of physically and school-wise, I went from full-time to 3/4 time school. Not much of a difference, basically just less than 12 credits, more than 9 credits. So luckily with those classes, I was able to pass relatively easily. Same with because I was taking the same social justice or race and social justice class. I was taking a U.S. history class. I didn't do as well in that U.S. history class as I should have, but I think I got a C, and therefore passed. But I would have liked to have done better in that class, but I kind of had to do what I could. So come April, luckily, obviously, since I've been with my race and social justice teacher this whole entire school year, she obviously knew about my surgery, about what it would take to keep going to class, and knew that I would be she knew every time I wasn't at class, I was probably at the doctor, even though I would also let her know, obviously, that I'm at the doctor. So she knew the drill. She was, and this is definitely, she was an example. Her name is, I probably shouldn't say her name, but she was a shining example of what every college professor should strive to be. Well, or smart, good at her job, and accommodating to students, because that's exactly what she was with me. And I was able to do the work, get the work done, and she was willing to help me in the ways that I needed help, because it was also still hard to type at this point. And so luckily it was my right shoulder that was messed up and not my left, and I'm a left-hander when I'm writing, so she would also allow me to write everything down handwritten, even though the assignment might be, have to be typed. But anyways, that was just one of the many ways that she was very accommodating. And luckily, I was able to keep taking that class and keep moving forward in my inquiry classes instead of being set back by that. And help and keep in communication and just rather flexible in terms of being able to do the class. So she was one of the good ones. So I had my surgery in April 2011, and this was after I had finished winter term as well. Finished the finals, did decent enough on the finals in terms of projects and tests or whatever, passed classes, and I was already registered for spring term and finished all and got going on that. Unfortunately, it was really hard because obviously surgery doesn't necessarily fix the pain right away. You still are in quite a bit of pain, obviously, because someone had to cut you open and re-sew ligaments together. So you have even less mobility. You have still about the same amount of pain. Obviously, this time you leave the operation room with a bunch of drugs and good ones for pain. And you're still having to go to physical therapy. I had to go physical therapy from basically April all the way till September 2011. So an entire 5-6 month stretch over the summer. I was having to do physical therapy for that. So basically not a whole lot changed right away from the rest of the school year that I was having. But it was obviously in order for the future to change. And boy, did it. But unfortunately, I had to take a little bit less in terms of my class load. I actually had to withdraw from one class for medical purposes, obviously, because it was a history class, which we all know history classes are rife with so much writing and typing. And I was high on Percocet all the time because they were like, you have to be taking it as long as you have pain. And they gave me 3 months 3 months supply because they're like, you're going to be in a lot of pain, so here you go, buddy. And so it was just really hard to get through that class because it was a class that was basically a glorified typing class. And so I talked to the professor. He says, oh yeah, I'm so sorry, it's obviously not your fault. And I said, yeah, it's obviously not your fault. You have a lot of typing in your classes. And he was like, that doesn't sound like an insult. That sounds actually like a true compliment and sincere, even though generally you're a sarcastic asshole. Just kidding. That was my own little commentary to put on it because I know what that comment could have sounded like in general. So I had to, and plus I was hardly in Portland at this point. I mean, I was enough, obviously, but I basically I missed a whole week of class because I had to obviously recover at my parents' house. And during this week that I was recovering, my dad told me about the new media communications program at Oregon State, and explained to me how, and it did, and he explained to me how it sounded more along the lines of what I was actually looking for in terms of my schooling and what I want to do for my career. And so I was like, it definitely made me think twice about sticking it out with Portland State. And I think at this point, so this was in 2011, I think at this point, the new media communications major may have only been a year old. It was that's how new it was. It was extremely new. And my dad told me about it. And I definitely was like, okay, that's definitely something to consider. And over the course of this week and basically the rest of that month, I was thinking about it. Me and my dad were talking a little more, and I finally decided, okay, I guess it's time for me to transfer to Oregon State. It would be easier, especially right now, in terms of me having to recover and re-strengthen and help my shoulder get better. It would help me to stay closer by all the medical things that I need to have access to at that point. It would save that kind of commute. I could still be going to school right next door at the same college campus. And then also it sounds like I can actually get access to a camera of some sort, a better camera than the one I owned, obviously. So that's exactly what I did. despite missing the first deadline for application to Oregon State in terms of transfer, because I think the application deadline was obviously in late February, I managed to get turn in the application to get some sort of exception to basically extend the deadline. Yeah, so basically at that point, I was obviously getting things started in terms of trying to transfer. And so luckily I was able to get that extension on the deadline and apply to OSU for transfer. But once again, they were a little lax on their timeline on their end, and luckily they did their part by sending the rejection letter for this first attempted transfer one day after the LBCC fall 2011 timeline application deadline for that school. Because at that point I was like, well, I guess if I get rejected, and I guess I was also a little myopic and maybe not getting not seeing that my grades in those inquiry classes might hurt my transfer odds. I still had the backup plan of applying to LBCC, and at that point, especially early in 2011, I should have applied to LBCC anyways. And U of O as well, just to be like, let's get all the bases covered and let's finally be able to graduate, or not graduate, but transfer to U of O. But again, that kind of destroyed the purpose of why I was trying to transfer to Oregon State. It's still a little closer than Portland, but obviously still it would have been the most ideal at that point. Obviously would have been OSU or whatever. And maybe again that was short-sighted of me in terms of wanting to be in Corvallis or whatever, or needing to be in Corvallis and not thinking about like how I'd want to be after I needed to be in Corvallis for a certain amount of months. But again, I was stubborn and myopic, and I had to put my eggs in that one OSU basket because also that would have been like an extra like $100 just to apply to the damn place. So the limiting of funds will be a common theme throughout this whole thing. So again, I still haven't been able to find a job at that point, especially now. My job search was going to be limited for a while, considering my physical limitations until I would be able to be back to full strength. But in the meantime, there was no way I could work anything mildly physical. So luckily, even though I missed the LBCC deadline by 1 day, mind you, I was able to. I got a couple gigs editing videos for family friends, and work friends, and my mother's job. So luckily, I was able to somewhat occupy my time along with making skate videos and skating for that period of time to kind of pass the time until winter term comes around, because I did apply to LBCC during winter term. Sorry, what did I say? Well, luckily I was able to pass the time. Bottom line is, I was able to do stuff during fall 2011. In the meantime, while I applied for winter term at LBCC, which I did obviously get accepted for, because everyone gets accepted to community college, and yeah, they don't ask any questions. They just say, "Yep, you're in. If you pay the fee, you're in." Application fee, by the way. So basically, I was just killing time till winter 2012, which was the next term, obviously, to get started on that again. And luckily, I was able to do that.